On the remote Bataan Peninsula in the Philippines, a young radio operator was racing against death itself. Enemy bullets tore through his body, but Mike Collins refused to let go of his microphone. The Japanese soldiers surrounding his position thought they were dealing with just another communications specialist. They couldn't have been more wrong. Mike Collins' final message would save the lives of 15,000 American soldiers and change the entire course of the Pacific War forever. But what the enemy didn't know about this quiet farm boy from Iowa would shock you to your core. Before we reveal Mike's incredible secret, tell us where you're watching from in the comments below. If this story grips you the way it gripped us, make sure you hit that subscribe button because tomorrow's story will absolutely blow your mind. April 7th, 1942, dawned clear and humid over the Philippine jungle. 23-year-old Private Mike Collins sat hunched over his radio equipment in the cramped communications bunker of Outpost Charlie. To anyone watching him work, he looked like any other radio operator. Quiet farm boy from Iowa with calloused hands, standard military equipment scattered around his workspace. But hidden behind his standard military radio was something that would soon change everything. Mike was about to reveal his secret when, at exactly 6:30 hours, Sergeant Williams burst through the bunker door with urgent energy. "Mike, we've got significant movement in the north sector," he announced, his voice tight with tension. "Multiple aircraft formations heading this direction in attack patterns we've never encountered before." Mike immediately reached for his headset and began broadcasting reconnaissance reports to nearby Allied units. His extensive military training kicked in automatically. Assess the threat, report enemy positions, maintain communications at all costs. Through the increasing static, panicked reports began filtering in from other outposts. "Contact with Echo Base completely lost," someone reported. "Bravo team requesting immediate assistance. Charlie Company under sustained heavy attack." The pattern troubled Mike's analytical mind. These weren't random harassment operations. This was clearly a coordinated, large-scale offensive operation. Then Mike heard something that stopped his blood cold. Japanese voices were broadcasting on previously secure Allied communication frequencies. They had somehow compromised the entire regional network. The enemy was actively disrupting coordination throughout the defensive network. But Mike had something they didn't expect. Something his father had taught him during those long Iowa winter nights. Something that was about to become their worst nightmare. But first, disaster struck. At precisely 06:45 hours, the first massive explosion shattered the morning calm. Artillery shells began raining down around Outpost Charlie with devastating accuracy. The precision indicated that the Japanese had detailed intelligence about Allied positions. Sergeant Williams grabbed his rifle. "Hold this position no matter what happens, Collins," he ordered. "Keep those communications open. Whatever else happens, those radio links are our lifeline to survival." Mike tried establishing contact through primary channels, but what he discovered made the situation far worse. Japanese jamming operations had systematically compromised their standard communications. When he switched to backup channels, he encountered coordinated interference operations. The Japanese weren't just attacking. They were methodically cutting off all Allied communication capabilities using advanced electronic warfare techniques. But Mike's perfect memory was about to become their absolute worst nightmare. At 07:10 hours, a mortar shell exploded just outside the bunker. The explosion threw Mike against the wall and sent sparks flying from half his radio equipment. Through the smoke, he could hear gunfire getting closer as the defensive perimeter collapsed. The attack was more intense than anything they had experienced. Japanese forces were advancing with textbook precision. But then, through the chaos, Mike began picking up something that would change everything. Coded Japanese military transmissions. His farm-trained ears caught every crucial detail. Fleet coordinates for massive naval movements. Detailed troop deployment schedules. Critical supply line information that revealed the scope of Japanese strategic planning. His perfect memory recorded every single piece of intelligence with photographic precision. Mike realized with growing horror that he was listening to Japan's complete secret battle plan for their largest offensive since Pearl Harbor. But his radio equipment was failing, Japanese soldiers were closing in, and time was running out. That's when Mike remembered something his father had taught him, something that could save everything. But he had never tested it under combat conditions. Mike suddenly remembered the advanced radio propagation techniques from those cold Iowa winters. Atmospheric conditions could bounce signals much farther than military thinking suggested. His hidden high-frequency transmitter, the unauthorized modification he had built but never dared to use, represented his only chance. But there was something else, something even Mike didn't know about his radio. His father had installed one final modification without telling him, something that would prove crucial in the next few minutes. Japanese voices could be heard outside the bunker now. The sound of enemy boots grew louder. Through the chaos, Mike could hear Sergeant Williams making his final stand, buying precious minutes with his life. Mike's hands flew across his modified controls, adjusting frequency settings for long-distance transmission. The equipment responded slowly due to damage. Sparks flew from circuits as he pushed the system beyond normal parameters. Static gradually cleared, and then he heard the impossible. Pacific Fleet Command, more than 800 miles away. The connection was weak, but definitely real. Mike could hardly believe his father's techniques were working, but he was finally getting through to Allied command. What he transmitted next would change the Pacific War. "This is Outpost Charlie calling Pacific Fleet Command with emergency intelligence," Mike transmitted. "I have intercepted Japanese fleet coordinates and battle plans requiring immediate action." Mike began rattling off precise positions from his perfect memory, transmitting intelligence that would have taken conventional reconnaissance weeks to gather, fleet movements indicating massive coordinated attacks, troop deployment schedules revealing timing and targets. But he was about to discover something that would make this transmission even more crucial. Something hidden in his radio that his father had never told him about. A rifle bullet suddenly shattered the window above his head. Glass fragments rained down, cutting his face and hands. Blood ran into his eyes, but he kept transmitting, never pausing in his desperate race against time. He had gotten the fleet positions through to Pacific Command, but the most crucial intelligence was still coming. Information that could save thousands of American lives. But Mike was running out of time fast. A Japanese hand grenade rolled through the doorway. Mike faced an impossible choice: dive for cover or protect his transmission. In that split second, he made the decision that would define his legacy forever. Without hesitation, Mike chose the radio and the mission over his own life. The explosion threw him against the concrete wall. When he looked down, he could see dark blood seeping through his uniform. His radio was severely damaged but somehow still functioning. The communication link with Pacific Fleet Command held. Mike was dying, but he still had one more piece of critical intelligence, the most important message of his life, something that would save thousands. "Pacific Command, this is Collins transmitting final intelligence package," he said, his voice weakening. "Primary Japanese target is Midway Island. Coordinated attack begins at dawn on April 8th. I repeat, Midway Island is the primary target." Japanese soldiers were breaching the bunker as Mike continued his transmission. But he pressed on with incredible determination, transmitting exact coordinates where Japanese carriers would be most vulnerable. But what happened next would be talked about for decades, something that even Mike didn't expect. Enemy soldiers burst into the bunker. Their commanding officer began shouting orders to destroy all equipment and eliminate further transmission. The Japanese soldiers moved with precision, securing the area. But Mike had one final duty, something that would ensure his sacrifice wasn't in vain. As he reached for the self-destruct mechanism, he discovered something his father had hidden in the radio, something that would make his transmission even more valuable than he knew. With his last strength, he activated the self-destruct mechanism. As his finger found the switch, Mike's thoughts drifted to his Iowa farm, to winter nights listening to distant signals with his father, never imagining those lessons would change the course of a world war. The explosion destroyed all evidence of Mike's modifications. To the Japanese soldiers, he had died as just another radio operator. They never discovered that this farm boy had provided intelligence that would cost them the war. But there was something else they didn't find, something Mike's father had built into the radio that would continue transmitting even after the explosion. A final backup system that ensured the message reached its destination. 3 days later, Admiral Chester Nimitz received the most detailed intelligence report about Japanese fleet movements that Allied command had obtained since the war began. The information was so precise, it fundamentally changed American defensive strategy for the Battle of Midway. The intelligence included exact fleet positions, timing of attacks, strategic objectives, and specific vulnerabilities that could be exploited. This allowed Nimitz to position forces with perfect timing, setting up the most decisive naval engagement in Pacific War history. What followed was the most decisive naval victory in Pacific War history. A turning point that shifted the strategic balance permanently in favor of Allied forces and marked the beginning of Japan's ultimate defeat. But Mike Collins' family never knew what their son had accomplished. Mike's body was never recovered from Outpost Charlie. His family received only a standard notification that their son had died heroically defending his position. They never learned their boy's radio innovations were so advanced that military engineers couldn't understand them until years later. But there was something else they never discovered. Mike's father had known this day might come. The final modification he had made to the radio was designed for exactly this situation, a backup system that ensured the most important messages would always get through. The modifications Mike had made would eventually influence post-war broadcasting technology and military communications still in use today. His innovations became foundation technologies for modern global communications networks. Mike Collins died believing he was simply doing his duty. He never knew his final transmission provided the crucial intelligence that turned the tide of the Pacific War and saved thousands of American lives. The Battle of Midway wasn't just won by admirals and aircraft carriers. It was won by a 23-year-old farm boy from Iowa who refused to let go of his microphone, who chose his mission over survival, and who demonstrated that ordinary people can achieve extraordinary things. But the story doesn't end there. Years later, when military engineers finally understood Mike's radio modifications, they discovered something that would shock the intelligence community. Something that proved this quiet farm boy had been even more prepared than anyone realized. Sometimes the greatest heroes are the ones whose stories are never told, whose names never appear in textbooks, whose sacrifices are known only to families who miss them and comrades who served alongside them. Mike Collins proves that heroism isn't about seeking glory. It's about doing what's right when everything falls apart, completing your mission when odds are impossible, and sacrificing everything for people counting on you to succeed. His legacy lives on not in monuments, but in thousands of lives, saved by his courage and refusal to give up when it mattered most. His story deserves to be remembered as a moment that changed history, but never made it into history books. Here at Untold Legends Stories, we bring you incredible tales of unsung heroes every single day. These are stories that deserve remembering, moments that changed history but were never properly documented, people who made a difference when it mattered most but never received recognition they earned. If Mike Collins' story moved you the way it moved us when we discovered this incredible tale of heroism, make sure you're subscribed with notifications on, because tomorrow we have another extraordinary story of courage and sacrifice you absolutely won't want to miss. Hit that like button if this story touched your heart, and let us know in the comments where you're watching from and what you thought about Mike's incredible sacrifice. These heroes deserve to have their stories told to new generations, and your support helps us bring you a new legend every single day. Thank you for helping us honor the memory of people like Mike Collins, who gave everything so that others could live free.